Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to present a presentation about planning guidelines for bicycle infrastructure. I prepared this paper together with Magdalena Rezwow-Mosakowska. The paper was based on the experiences related to the project commissioned by the Ministry of Infrastructure. The project was done in the years 2018-2020, and it pertained to the technical conditions for designing and maintenance of public roads. And one of the tasks of the Warsaw University of Technology was to prepare planning guidelines for road infrastructure, for bicycle infrastructure. The first part pertains to planning guidelines. That's the first presentation. The second presentation pertains to the designs. There are 3 volumes of guidelines dedicated to bicycle infrastructure, but it's worth mentioning that there is one more volume related to designing roadside, where cycling issues are very seriously addressed. The volume related to planning pertains mainly to 8 issues. These are bicycle routes planning rules, bicycle routes planning requirements, bicycle user characteristics and their requirements, which are quite diversified, the hierarchy of bicycle routes, location of bicycle routes, and the entire process of planning bicycle infrastructure, and the criteria for selecting the right infrastructure, and finally, integration of bicycle traffic with public transport. We were given a number of objectives when we were designing the guidelines. The most important one was to facilitate the development and improve the quality of bicycle infrastructure. This is a very real goal. The users of public transport should have the right to expect that the often declared sustainable mobility will come true. It should mean that cycling should become a safe alternative to driving a car. That, of course, calls for the development of a consistent, coherent, dense network of bicycle roads and bicycle paths. So, again, the first purpose is to facilitate the improvement of infrastructure. Objective 2 is to harmonize planning and design rules. We are aware that in Poland, local regulations are quite strong and quite diversified, especially in large cities. But these having their local importance because they respond to local needs. But when our aim was to unify the planning processes by introducing certain common standards, especially in view of road safety. And the third objective was to improve cooperation in planning, cooperation between planning and design office and road administrators. So between those who prepare the designs and those who commission them. It is therefore worth adding that the guidelines constitute a certain development and supplement to the existing regulations that have already been in place and will continue being binding at the legal level of regulation. There will be a regulation of technical and construction requirements for new roads and roadways. The conditions for bicycle route planning, the most important one, especially at the planning stage, were summarized in 7 points. As you can see on the graph on the right-hand side. First of all, you have to look at the existing infrastructure and its condition. Infrastructure as a whole and bicycle infrastructure in particular. The land use status, so we need to identify sources and purposes of traffic, sources and destination, the arrangement of public transport hubs, which will allow us to easier combine bicycle traffic with public transport where the transition takes place. Next is the objectives and tasks resulting from the existing transport policies and strategies. We are now using documents which encourage us all to modify and rearrange the division of transportation tasks between the existing modes of transport. We are supposed to do it in a slightly different structure. The development plans for transport infrastructure is another segment. It needs to be included at the stage of developing infrastructure, but also spatial planning. We need to identify the needs of different user groups. We know that different types of user will have different needs for bicycle traffic. And the last item is local conditions. We have to consider local specificity. Now, I did mention various users. We divided them roughly into 5 groups. These are people who take rides locally. These are short trips by bike. For instance, people who commute to work or to school, or those who are not very experienced cyclists. The second one is those who travel very far. Then the third are recreational cyclists. The fourth is touring cyclists. These are ones that take really long trips and often do not travel back and forth. And cyclists riding for sports. They will ride at different speeds, they will have different requirements for traffic, they'll have different requirements for road surface and different links to public transport. Now, when we look at the planning requirements, these are requirements that need to be met not only at planning surfaces. We have a classical situation here where we talk about safety, consistency, directness, comfort, and attractiveness. The Crow handbook, you made us get used to this. A very important part is the completeness of the route system. I seem to have lost a slide here. And it won't come back. Can we go back a little? Is it possible? To the slide related to the requirements. Thank you very much. Very important element is to provide safety by, for instance, building complete systems. The road network is safe if it's continuous. And it's also important what sort of areas they cross. Another thing for safety is we should not only consider cyclists, but also everybody else. And we can, for instance, minimize possible points of conflict by properly designing the bicycle routes. At the bottom of the slide, I'm showing a table which shows the design speed depending of the parameters. I lost the ability, so please give me another slide. Thank you very much. The next thing we do is to build a hierarchy of bicycle routes. This is a very important element at the planning stage. We need to allocate functions to the various types of routes. Typically, there is a user-based classification, so we divide the cyclists into those who do transport, recreation, or mixed. The routes, therefore, are classified depending on why you're taking the ride. What we do in our guidelines is to suggest a functional division or functional technical division. We want to divide them into 2 groups: velo highways, main and supplementary. Velo highways, velostrada. They are based on the design speed and the type of connections. The draft guidelines assume that the velostrada will work as a highway for bicycles. We assume high traffic intensity and long distance. These would be, for instance, links between major districts inside a city or connecting city center to suburbs. These should have the best technical parameters in terms of visibility, width, curve radius, etc. And the main way of doing this should be a bicycle road, which is a completely separated out bicycle roadway. Main ones should be the ones that service the main connections in a given area, but they are shorter, but that should include connections between settlements and should be interconnected with collective. And at the bottom there's supplementary. These are simply serving as a supplement to the main and highway, connecting them to where people live. Possible interconnection between those classes you can see here. Various classes can connect or intersect or not. Next slide, please. We should consider the connection of origins and destinations. You can, for instance, use the existing roadways, but you should also be able to use the bike to take a shortcut where motor vehicles are not allowed. This gives us an opportunity to achieve a consistent, at the end of the day, a consistent network of connections, because the road network is usually prepared in that way. When we look at very wide roadways, bicycle lanes should be designed on both sides wherever possible, allowing the users to take alternative routes depending on how intense the traffic is. When we look at cyclists using the roadway, this is often problematic because of high car traffic intensity and often high car velocity. However, oftentimes there have to be bicycles riding on there because of connectivity. In those cases, separating the bicycles from cars would be very important to ensure cyclist safety. Another important element is outside cities, routes class Z, L, and D, which should be treated as part of the bicycle system. That's how they should be used. This is where we have a description of the process of planning. So in this slide, we see that the process should really start from the identification of the origins and destinations for the cyclists. Best to do it graphically using a map. That defines the directions of movements, and this can be translated into a graphical presentation of cycle route options. That allows us to find barriers that could be obstacles to the development of the system. And eventually there should be an analysis and solutions following a consultation process to propose several options that could be done. Obviously, the social consultations should be done with the local communities and users. Only this would allow us to arrive at the end product in the form of a good plan for bicycle network in a given location. If in doubt, then at the level of plannings we mentioned that we should leave options for later to choose after the planning stage, at the stage of realization. 2 slides left. The important thing is that the preliminary routing should be defined at design stage based on availability of land and the ability to meet the basic requirements for bicycle routes. It should depend on the class of road, the location of public transport stops, the systems of parking, traffic intensity. We discussed that, not only motor vehicles, pedestrians, but also cyclists, and the maximum speeds. And the last slide in summary. In our opinion, the process of planning obviously begins when we create the strategy of transport policies. At this stage, there should be coordination of the planning process between spatial planning and transport system planning in order to ensure the ability or improve the quality of short trips. We should end at the preliminary design stage. Professor Zalewski talked about this. And we have to often go back to it from the design stage back to the planning stage. The second conclusion is that we should do the entire process in stages. So we should go towards the final solution by going through the various stages of the analysis. Always taking into consideration design requirements, but also social and economic factors. And the last part is that we hope that this unification of regulations and the future use of the guidelines and that will follow from the new resolution will improve the quality of work in planning networks, bicycle networks that are done in Poland, already at the stage of planning. Thank you very much.